Okay. So, hello everyone, and welcome to the 2021 Veg Summit. I'm Simon Wright, food writer and broadcaster, and I also run a food store and cafe in West Wales where we serve loads of delicious local veg. Today, we have a terrific panel who are going to discuss how to shift the dial on veg. How do we increase veg consumption amongst the people of Wales? Why is that important? What are the tools available to us to do that? How do we act swiftly and radically to reverse the continuing decline that we see in veg consumption in Wales? Today's all brought to you by Please, a UK-wide national lottery-funded initiative, all about getting folks to eat more veg, bringing together farmers, retailers, hospitality, processors, wholesalers, and government with the common goal of making it easier to eat veg. And Food Sense Wales deliver Please in Wales. In the front line of that campaign are Please Pleasures. I knew that was going to cause me a problem. And Veg Advocates, and we have a couple of those here today, and I'm going to ask them to talk about their roles later. A little bit of housekeeping. This is all going to take place in webinar format, so you will only see the speakers on your screen. Please use the chat function to introduce yourselves and ask questions. If you put a Q before your question, that will help us to pick those out. And we also need to tell you that the session is being recorded. The format for today is that you will hear first from our keynote speaker, Fiona Kinghorn, Executive Director for Public Health for Cardiff and Vale University Health Board, and member of Healthy Weight, Healthy Wales Implementation Board. Then we're going to hear from Dan Parker, the Chief Executive of Veg Power, before we have our panel discussion, which we expect to start around 2:40, wrapping up about 3:30. So to kick things off, without further delay, let me hand over to Fiona Kinghorn to give us the keynote speech. Thank you, Fiona.
Thank you very much, Simon. Well, I'm absolutely delighted to be here. I mean, with so many different people passionate about looking at how we turn the dial on the demand for vegetables. And for me, it's about innovation, creativity, dynamic thinking with an eclectic range of people. I think that's what this is about. And I think we're past using traditional methods for getting things done, because traditional methods alone don't cut it, basically, I would say. So I'm really, really delighted to be part of this. So Welsh Government actually launched Healthy Weight, Healthy Wales in 2019. And what that does is set out a 10-year strategy and vision to prevent and reduce obesity across Wales. And it's a comprehensive plan, but it takes people like us, a whole mix of people, to bring it alive and to deliver it. We don't want a strategy that sits on the side, on a shelf. We want to actively deliver it to create impact over the next 10 years. And actually, if we do look at some, why are we doing this? And there are underpinning statistics, and they may seem fairly negative, but it's always important for us just to be aware of them. So only around 40% of adults in Wales are a healthy weight, and more than 1 in 4 of our children are classed as overweight or obese when they start primary school. And that's so different for some of us who are getting on a little bit. It's so different, I think, from our experience maybe when we were growing up as children. It has changed so much, I would say, over the past 30 to 40 years. And if we think in medical terms for a minute, if these trends continue, more people in Wales will die prematurely of cancer, of heart disease, of liver disease, of type 2 diabetes. And more people will be adversely affected in disability and ill mental and physical health. And the COVID arena brings that into sharp relief. We know it's been extremely challenging for people over this past year and a half. And I've no doubt that COVID has affected people's physical health, and it's very clear it's affected people's emotional and mental health too. So we have got a job to do. And we know, don't we, the factors causing unhealthy weight, they're varied and they're complex, so there is no one solution to any of these things. But we know that environments and systems play an absolutely key role. And as I said at the beginning, it's not just about our traditional thinking of the solutions to some of these issues. And so the food environment plays a key role in what both we choose to eat and drink, or what we're influenced to eat and drink. And sometimes it's, as we know, it's out with people's control in terms of how things are organised within the system, and we can influence some of those for the better. So Welsh Government, because in recognition of the food environment being important, will be launching a consultation on it later this year. So it is our perfect opportunity to everyone in the room to influence that agenda with our collective but diverse thinking. So the focus on our discussions today is how can we turn up the dial on the demand for veg? And it's a great strapline. So just a few other statistics published by Please Veg Facts Report, just in case you weren't aware of any of them. So diets that are low in vegetable are associated with up to 18,000 premature deaths in the UK every year. I feel like the voice of doom, but just to highlight some of these things and the role that food actually plays. An increase in vegetable intake so that everybody gets 5 a day, with the extra consumption coming from veg, could contribute 8 additional months to the UK's average life expectancy. Now, we wouldn't normally think that, would we? And we wouldn't normally give that attribute to food. And it can actually decrease greenhouse gas emissions by about 8.2%. So we're very passionate. I think there's just such an increasing momentum on climate change. I think it's important for us to acknowledge the role that food plays in that. And almost a third of children, so about 29%, aged 5 to 10 year olds, eat less than 1 portion of vegetables in a day. And we've got to start reversing that. There are so many opportunities for us to change that. A fifth of children and teenagers' vegetable intake now comes from foods which we would class as ultra processed, with baked beans and pizza. Of course, they're very nice, but contributing 60% of children's vegetable intake. There must be something we can do about that. So this is really a call to action on this arena. And actually, inequalities have very much come to the fore in COVID. And of course, we've known about them for years. They're also complex, but they've come to the fore even more, I think, during the COVID period. So inequalities in vegetable consumption are also really clear. So the poorest 20% of UK households would need to spend 39% of their disposable income on food to meet the Eat Well guide, which is the government recommended diet, the costs of that. And this compares to just 8% of disposable income for the richest 20%. There's a real unfairness in that. We know if you're living in poverty, you have to make decisions around what you spend your money on. And this may not be at the top of the list if you're thinking about housing or keeping warm or all the other things that you have to do. So where do we find the solutions to create a food environment that promotes healthy choices, and where does the responsibility lie? So I'll just highlight a couple of arenas. The vegetable facts state that just 1.85% of food and soft drink advertising spend goes towards promoting veg. And I'm concerned, actually, the overall exposure to junk food advertising tends to be greater in areas of high deprivation. So it's almost designed in that way, and there must be ways that we can reverse some of that. It's therefore vital that a shift in advertising is progressed to help reinforce healthy food choices. And it's one of the things that we've committed to locally in our local plans in Cardiff and Vale. As part of our Cardiff and Vale Move More, Eat Well partnership, we've pledged to ensure that advertising marketing is healthy. And our ambition is to shift the balance from an environment that exposes our children and young people to high levels of junk food advertising to one where the focus is on healthier food advertising. And you'll know that Veg Power, or if you haven't heard about it, Veg Power and ITV's Eat Them to Defeat Them campaign, you'll hear about those shortly. They're two excellent examples of shifting the balance in that regard. Another arena is around retailers and out-of-home providers, such as restaurants, cafes, workplaces. They all have a significant part to play. It might have been slightly different, I know, and really challenging over this past year and a bit, but they do, as we are able to reopen and get back to some sense of normality, and they play a significant part through promoting healthy options, restricting promotions of high fat, salt, and sugar products, and adding value to support schemes, such as boosting the value of Healthy Start through in-store initiatives. And if you haven't heard about the Healthy Start scheme, it's a government initiative that provides eligible families with vouchers worth £4.25 every week. And you might think, well, that's not much, but if you have a small budget, then it's a fair amount to contribute towards things like milk, fresh, frozen and tinned fruit and vegetables, fresh, dried and tinned pulses, and infant formula milk. And the scheme supports families in receipt of certain benefits, specifically helping pregnant and breastfeeding mums and children under the age of 4. And women and children receiving the Healthy Start food voucher are also given vitamin coupons to exchange for free Healthy Start vitamins, specifically designed for pregnant and breastfeeding women and growing infants and preschool children. Now, 40% who are eligible for this scheme are not taking it up in Wales. So there's a deficit there. That's one arena where we've got people who could have some additional support and they're not taking it up for whatever reason. So there must be solutions to try and get that percentage up. And we need to find ways in partnership to solve that issue. I'm absolutely heartened to see that pledges secured through Please have seen 162 million additional portions of vegetables served in the UK in the last 4 years. That just shows the power that if we put our collective attention to something, we can shift it. And of course, I will talk about Cardiff and Vale a little bit. It's close to my heart, but I'm really proud to see the impact of our sustainable food partnerships locally, so Food Cardiff and Food Vale, and the impact that they've made to this agenda. So place-based approaches to tackling the food environment are key, and we need to show that we're promoting the best possible messages within our schools, around schools, in our hospitals, in our workplaces, in our leisure facilities, in our parks, and many other environments. We've supported the Sustainable Food Partnership, Food Cardiff, together with Cardiff Council since 2014. And I was really delighted to see this week. And I know my senior colleagues in the Health Board and local government were to see that they've achieved Silver Sustainable Food Places status. And that's only amongst a few in the UK, so that's fantastic. And I'm also really delighted to see that Food Sense Wales is supporting 4 other places in Wales develop their partnerships with their aspirations, with all the different people involved in creating change. So Food Cardiff is hosted by Cardiff and Vale Public Health Team, includes 127 individuals across 74 organisations, and has a strategy board that includes a range of members across the city. And through this network of dedicated partners, Cardiff is driving change at city level and is working to tackling some of today's biggest social, economic and environmental issues. And as part of the citywide partnership, Cardiff Council has published a plan committing to the development of a city centre food plan, fast food exclusion zones around Cardiff schools, extending the rollout of the school holiday enrichment programme, which is a way of tackling poverty within holiday periods, more restrictions on junk food advertising, and to support local food growing initiatives. And Food Cardiff also co-created the Veg Cities campaign with Sustainable Food Places as part of the wider Please initiative. Is now a feature campaign of sustainable food places, with 25 places across the UK taking action to drive up vegetable consumption. Cardiff was declared a Veg City in 2017, providing an umbrella structure for much of the amazing food work being developed in the city. And as part of the Food Cardiff Veg Cities campaign, 24 organisations have made a pledge, and it is estimated that 123,000 additional portions of veg will be served per year in Cardiff if all those pledges are met. Restaurants have been working collaboratively with us, for example, on reducing vegetable waste, and farmers markets have been expanding their veg offer and their market locations. And from 2019 onwards, children in Cardiff primary schools were also receiving an extra portion of vegetables with their lunch for no additional cost. Now, I use those examples just to highlight what can be achieved if you bring often unusual suspects and partners into the room and you look at what might be possible and you have the ambition to make the change. So I'm absolutely delighted to be here, fully supportive of this work, and I look forward to the conversations. And without further ado, we would like to show you just a video that shows the Veg Cities campaign being delivered across Cardiff, and then I'll pass back to Simon. Thank you.
Food Cardiff connects people and projects to promote healthy, sustainable and ethical food across the city. Being a Veg City is one campaign that supports Food Cardiff's 5 Good Food Goals, and 42 pledges have been made to grow, sell, cook, serve and save more vegetables in Cardiff.
So we create small seasonal menus. We like to use local producers, ideally ones based just outside Cardiff or in Wales. We don't think that good food should just be something that privileged people can enjoy. It should be, everyone deserves to have access to good, nutritious food. We run regular community dinners. They're a dinner for everyone. They provide an evening for connection, for healthy food. People might learn about different cuisines they've not eaten before.
O'n i'n falch iawn cael y cyfle mynd mewn i'r ysgolion, yn enwedig fan hyn yn Gaerdydd, a aethon ni mewn gyda'n chef ni. Wnaethon ni hufen iâ allan o carrots, wnaethon ni smoothies allan o brocoli. Oedd e'n twymwch calon chi rili, gweld plant fydde ddim yn arferol yn ôl nhw yn bita'r llysiau hyn. Ti fewn 20 munud, hanner awr, o'n nhw'n bita moron fel o'n nhw. So oedd e'n benter ffantastig i fod yn rhan o.
We started to give it away plants to people and some soil to help the community to gain confidence and to learn new skills with plants.
It made me fall in love to grow, to have the compost, to have the seed, and I ate my first tomato I grew in South Riverside in Cardiff, and it was amazing.
I became a veg advocate because I believe that the way to access good, healthy food sometimes is to start and grow it yourself. So I thought it was a really good idea to help people learn to grow their food and what you can do with it. There's no more, satisfying feeling than having a tomato come off your plant. That's success in life and in the garden, isn't it?
Thanks, Fiona. That was a terrific summary, and a lot of striking figures there, flacking up, I think, the enormous size of the challenge. It is quite frightening, but it's also a real call to arms, isn't it? If that isn't any reason to be doing something and be putting all our efforts in to making change, then I don't know what is. Some great examples of stuff that's already going on there, and also some marvelous figures that reflect the effectiveness of how effective action can be on the ground. And one of the key areas for battle is, as Fiona said there, is clearly advertising. And that's where we come to our next speaker, Dan Parker. Dan actually can't be with us this afternoon, so he's got a recorded piece for us. Dan is the chief executive of Veg Power, which is a brilliant organization that sprung from a competition that simply really asked for proposals for advertising that would encourage kids to eat more veg. And that's turned into something quite extraordinary. And Dan is going to talk about that in the upcoming video that we have for you now.
Hello, this is Dan Parker from Veg Power. Sorry I can't be with you today. We have just launched Eat Them to Defeat Them 2021. We've got a £3 million TV advertising campaign on tellies today, thanks to our friends at ITV, Channel 4 and Sky. We've got a schools programme that is launched in 1,900 primary schools across the UK, including about 170 schools in Wales. And our team are busy touring the country, visiting schools, learning about how we can improve the program. And we're going to be in Caerphilly on the 24th of June in the area. Then do come and see us. That would absolutely be great. Today, Katie has asked me to share with you a little bit of my experience in the world of marketing and advertising. For those that don't know, prior to working to launch Veg Power, I spent many years working in the marketing and advertising of not such healthy food and supermarkets, things of that nature. And we learned a great deal that we try and apply every day in Veg Power. And I'm going to share with you just a few of the tips I learned along the way. So the first, and I think probably the most important thing I can share, is that people don't buy health, they buy happiness. Now with kids, that's really simple. With kids, how much fun am I having now is generally what happiness is all about. And so therefore, in all the work we do is we don't talk to kids about nutrition, we don't talk to kids about health, particularly things like cancer and diabetes and heart disease. We just keep it fun, because that keeps the kids engaged. With adults, happiness is a much more complicated thing and obviously varies greatly from person to person. There are a few things are a constant truth. But generally, in terms of if you want to try and connect with people, try and find the reason that what you're talking about is going to make them happy. Or certainly talking about the great things that are going to happen to them now, rather than the terrible things that are going to happen to them in the long term, particularly if we're talking sort of disease and death and destruction. Now, in order to get happiness right, it's absolutely essential to understand people. And so my second point would be, is that understanding is much more powerful than evidence. And I think this is particularly pronounced in anything to do with health and well-being. In what we call the intention behavior gap, which is in between what people say and what people do, is particularly pronounced around health, particularly pronounced around vegetables. And if you sit somebody in a survey situation, it becomes even more pronounced because they feel in the spotlight. So therefore, if you really want to understand people, what you need to do is observe people. The best way to learn about grocery is to go and spend some time just standing in a grocery store and watching people. So I would say, try your absolute hardest to understand, and what you're looking to understand is what are the things that really motivate people? What are the things that are going to make them happy? What are their heart's desires? And if you can connect the behavior change that you want to bring about to those desires, you're much likely to get some support from them. The third pocket wisdom I'll share with you is that we think much less than we think we think. Not my quote. This is particularly true when it comes to choosing food. So marketeers think of people in either a hot, irrational, emotional state or a cold, rational, calculating state. And most decisions we made by food tend to be emotionally driven. I deserve it. I've had a bad day. I'm celebrating. Whatever it might be, those emotions charge an awful lot of our food choices. If you want to change people in the long term, you need to be talking to them on the emotional level. Try and connect the behavior change you want to bring about to what is emotionally very powerful to those people. Number 4, inspiration is how information travels. We have a lot of people in the world who are not very well. And then we have a lot of people who know exactly what it is those people need to do to not be unwell. But we're not connecting those two things together. And the reason we're failing to connect those two things together is that information by itself, education by itself, does not get listened to, it does not get consumed. You have to inspire people and excite people and think about how you take the message that you've got and make it really engaging and really exciting, going back to that consideration of understanding people and their happiness drivers. The final thought is that simple things get done. Now, this is true in all factors in life. Simple things get done and complex things get discussed. But the art of advertising is to boil ideas down to the simplest you can possibly make them. The future's bright, the future's orange. Vorsprung technique. These are really complicated ideas condensed down into a few words, because the amount of attention span that people are going to give you is very small indeed. So if you've got something like a poster ad, any more than about 10 words is probably going to stop people from reading it and is going to be a waste and confuse things. So if you're making a video, Well, really, any video much longer than about a minute is a bit of a waste of time. 2 minutes are the max. If people start your video and see that it's 5 minutes, they probably won't watch it. And in truth, it's the first 6 seconds that really count. So understand that you have a very short window of opportunity to talk to people, to connect with them emotionally, offer them something that's going to improve and excite their lives. And so you get really, really punchy and really, really exciting. For me personally, I believe that marketing and advertising, I think it's a bit like what Attenborough said about climate change, is that we know what it is that we need to do to improve the health and well-being of the nation. What we have now is a massive great communications challenge to make those things exciting for people to do. Thanks very much indeed for your time. Please do, if you have a moment, keep an eye on the Eat Them, Defeat Them campaign. Look out for the hashtag Eat Them, Defeat Them on social media. There's so much going on in schools and in families, and it's really exciting to follow. Thanks very much indeed for your time.
Thanks so much to Dan for sending that in to us. I think it's fascinating, particularly from a sort of poacher turned gamekeeper perspective. It's really interesting to hear what we need to do in terms of trying to win hearts and minds, and in what is quite an uneven battle when you consider the resources behind the kind of advertising that we're subjected to daily. But really, really useful stuff, and I think really interesting. I think that some years ago, I made a radio program called The Kids Who Fell in Love with Food, which had the premise of that familiarizing kids with the food that they consume, getting them to cook it, knowing where it came from, would bring them closer to it and may change their diet. And we saw that did work in many ways. But the one thing I hadn't expected so much was that it was the actual creativity of cooking that really made a difference and inspired the children. And you know, that sense of self-worth and self-esteem that they had when they can say, I made that loaf of bread, or I made that particular dish. And I think that's something that we really need to try and bring back into children's lives. So to move on from there, to discuss everything that we've heard so far and much more, we need to move on to our panel. Let me introduce them to you briefly. We have Fiona Kinghorn, as you've already met, Director of Public Health for Cardiff and Vale University Health Board. Gary Mahoney, who is involved in healthy preschool schemes and is a Veg Advocate. Alex Cook, founder of Swperbox, a Please Pledger, a Veg Advocate, and also Director of Slow Food Wales. He does some other things as well. Beth Rhodes, very inspiring young food ambassador for the children's rights to food. Thank you, Beth, for being with us today. I understand you're giving up school this afternoon. That must be tough. Katie Palmer, who's the program manager for Food Sense Wales and has been involved in this kind of thing for very, very long time and doing amazing work. And we have Edward Morgan, who is the Group Corporate Social Responsibility and Training Manager at Castle Howell, and also I've known for a long time and does loads of good work. So welcome to you all. I'd like you to, I'll introduce you in turn and give you the opportunity to say a little bit about the work that you do. I also want you to spread a little bit of veg joy this afternoon and tell me something about a recent great veg experience that you had. Mine, for instance, would be the first new potatoes I had from Blind Camel Farm the night before last, which you know, what else could you want? Very, very fresh, super tasty, a little bit of black pepper, some Welsh butter, maybe some mint. You don't need anything else. Okay, that's mine. So over to you. I'm going to start with Gary. Gary, tell us a little bit about what you do, just a minute or two, and give us a great veg experience from your recent past.
Thanks, Simon. Yeah, so I've worked in early years education to kind of support healthy eating programs with the really young, and working with parents as well on that. It's been a fascinating journey. It's something I've become really passionate about over the last sort of 8 to 10 years, and really excited to be a veg advocate as well. In terms of experience, I'm a very amateur grower. I do try my best. I've had some success with beetroot over the last couple of years, but this year I'm really excited to see the peas growing nicely in the garden. And I'm using netting for the first time, so that's an exciting thing for me. I've never done it before. Just let it kind of grow wild, but this year I'm trying to do it a bit more professionally. Brilliant, Gary. I look forward to hearing more about your beetroot. Alex Cook, Alex, can you say a few words about what you're up to? You know, a lot, basically.
Hello, Alex Cook. founder of Swperbox, which is Wales's first and own recipe box service. We're a Please pledger, so we've campaigned to always include as a minimum in all our meals 2 out of 5 of your daily veg. And also involved in that is basically we're a social enterprise, so we run community food education programs and using profit for purpose to deliver on some of the Please campaign as well. Also director of Slow Food Wales, constantly working for good, clean and fair food for all. And yeah, thank you.
Did you give us your veg inspiration? If we did,
oh, sorry. Yeah,
come on.
Veg choice. So many to choose from. In particular, last week we went up to visit one of our local suppliers up on just on the edge of the Brecon Beacons National Park, and he's growing, to my knowledge, the first time in Wales, a variety of callaloo, which is like a Caribbean spring green, which is fantastic. We do a lot of world recipe boxes, and it's really, really exciting to be able to get unique ingredients here in Wales that are super fresh. Amazing. Brilliant.
Sounds fantastic. Beth, tell us what you've been up to.
My name is Beth Rhodes. I'm 15 years old and I currently live in North Wales. I'm a Right to Food ambassador as well as some others across the UK. I work with the Food Foundation quite a lot. We have delivered a Right to Food charter which we presented to Parliament last year before. I've been an ambassador for 3 years. As a group, we meet quite a lot to discuss what we can do to change children's food, whether that's advertising, working on what we can do locally. But I'm really excited to be here today. Veg Joy, not too recent, but I think it's the one that really sticks out for me. About a year ago, I was involved in my school with bringing some year 6s up to year 7, and that was in the summer holidays, and during that there was a fruit and veg taster session where some of them haven't even tasted some more of the common fruit and veg, so just to see people's reactions in that environment was really quite special.
Thanks, Beth. That's really inspiring. Can I just ask you a question quickly? How does this get received? And I mean, you're clearly spending a lot of time on this. You're a real, I know, passionate advocate for veg and changes in diet. How do you feel is that widely thought about amongst your peers? How is it received by them?
I mean, for me, you can see food poverty everywhere, especially in the school environment, whether it's just someone who can't afford water or they've used up the daily allowance, it's still there, but the conversation isn't there. And I suppose this is what we're trying to do.
Great. Thanks, Beth. Katie Palmer, Programme Manager, Food Sense Wales. Katie.
Beth, you've just stolen my idea for what I was going to say about my veg moment. I'm still going to use it. I'll share it in a minute.
I do apologise.
So yeah, I'm Katie Palmer. I'm Programme Manager at Food Sense Wales, and we're all about influencing how food is produced and consumed in Wales, and we want a just and connected and prosperous food system for Wales. I also sit with Fiona on the implementation board for the obesity strategy, Healthy Weight, Healthy Wales, which is overseen by the Deputy Minister. And I also sit on the food and drink industry board for Wales as well. And I'm also a board member for Veg Power too. In terms of my veg inspiration, and Beth, I'm assuming you're talking about a food and fun club that was happening over the summer holidays with SHEP, the school holiday enrichment programme.
Yes, it was, yeah.
Yeah, so I have a similar experience when I went to visit one in Cardiff. In fact, it was probably 2 years ago now because we didn't run it last year with COVID. But we were doing similar sort of tasting sessions, and a child had never seen or tasted celery before. So they had the celery sticks chopped up on the table and they were testing them out and trying them. And the child couldn't get its head around what celery looked like as a whole plant. So I took this child along to the kitchens and I talked to the kitchen manager there, and I said, "You don't happen to have a celery in your fridge, do you?" She was like, "Yes." And the child came in, and then the catering manager sat and talked through with the child what this, showed them the celery and what it looked like. And it was Beth, you're right, it was that kind of face of wonderment that this thing could come out of the ground. So that's my moment.
I think those are very, very good moments. But Edward, I know you do some of this stuff with the kids as well, and I'm not going to let you do the third example, okay? Edward, tell us about what you do with Castle Howell and, and the wider work that you've been doing for some time in the community.
Diolch, Simon. Prynawn da pawb, mae'n blister fod yn rhan o hwn heddiw. Good afternoon, thank you, Simon. It's a real pleasure to be a part of this today. Yeah, so I work for Castle Howell Foods, which some of you, or perhaps all of you, might be familiar with. You've seen the lorries going across Wales and on the border counties. Yeah, I guess our place in the supply chain, we do supply some 16 local authorities within Wales, and that includes schools and healthcare, also the NHS within Wales, but the rest of our business then is restaurants, cafes, so on and so forth. So we're in that kind of, we are those intermediaries in the supply chain, and to be quite simplistic, we buy things, we take orders, we put things on lorries, and we deliver, and hopefully get paid. That's kind of the way it works. However, we do try to get involved in some wider activities to try and be in a responsible business. And some of our activities as peas pledgers, and we're part of Veg Power and Eat Them to Defeat Them. We've worked with primary schools throughout Wales, very limited this year, of course, due to COVID. And I fully endorse what Dan said earlier by keep it fun for school children. We've been in schools in the past, and perhaps I can sort of touch upon that later on in this discussion. So I guess what I was thinking, for us adults and us grown-ups, if it's keep it fun for the kids, well, keep it simple for adults, and another 3 words, just do it. It shouldn't really be that complicated to get veg. Well, it's not complicated to get veg from one place to the other, and it is available. Granted, not necessarily all from Welsh producers, but that might change in the future. So it's probably keep it simple and just do it and try. And it just seems sometimes a bit complicated, but we are driven by the consumer, and children are consumers, of course, and they do like different things. And crumbs, it is a problem, and we're just glad to be hopefully a part of the solution with yourselves, Simon, the panel, and the other people on the call today. Diolch, thank you.
Have you had any particular successes that you can inspire us with, Edward? Is there anything that sticks in your mind that's been a great veg moment for you?
The best veg moments I have been involved with Veg Power and engaging with primary schools. This year we did a series of videos. Video 2 is out this week to coincide with Sweet Corn Week. So we had a nice kind of beef tomatoes filled with rice and salsa and a bit of mozzarella on top. But certainly last year, without fail, when we go into schools with our development chef, there is no better feeling, and I say this with all sincerity, addressing children who say they haven't eaten carrots, broccoli, Katie mentioned celery earlier. They may have, but they just don't remember possibly, and that's kids for you. And getting that sense of fun, because we're not teachers, we're different people coming in. And within half an hour, 40 minutes, they're eating, as I mentioned in that video a little bit earlier, broccoli smoothies, carrots glazed with honey, carrot ice cream. I appreciate they're not on the school menu. However, it's still a bit of fun, and children do like veg. They just don't know it. And unfortunately, if we could clone ourselves and everybody here and go to every school once a week, then the problem would be far less. But unfortunately, we haven't got the resource to do that. And that's where we'll come on to the debate, no doubt, in terms of who is going to do it and who funds it and how it works and all that kind of stuff. So that's my veg moment, and I look forward to having more in the future when restrictions lift, hopefully. Thank you.
Just before we kick off the conversation properly, we've got to speak to Fiona. Fiona, I'm not going to ask you to introduce yourself because you've already made a huge contribution, but do you have a veg moment for us?
So I think I'll give the moment. It's not a moment, it's a recent veg experience, and it's about radish. And so that's the first vegetable we've had in our garden, actually, and it's my husband that does most of the growing, but then I just reap the benefits. And I think for me it's about social connections. So we've got some neighbours that during COVID, I used to get their food shopping, and to keep the connection, that the husband, he likes radish. So I popped down there. I've popped down there recently with a pile of radish, because anybody that grows them will know that you can't grow them too big because they go all spongy and horrible. So one, it's about connections and sharing with vegetables. And two, in praise of the radish, it's a bit of an unloved vegetable. So diversity in veg.
In praise of the radish, there's a book in there somewhere. That's a fantastic. I think that's a fantastic thing to talk about. Actually, is the kind of the sharing that veg brings. One of the lovely things that we get in the shop is that people will bring in some of their own bounty that we can then pass on, and we do it sort of on a barter basis. But it's an exciting thing that, you know, it's the same people come every year with their crop, maybe a different time, maybe the crop's a little bit bigger or smaller, but I love that sort of community process. So we're gonna open up the conversation now. As far as the panelists are concerned, if I'm going to come to you in turn, but if there's anything that you particularly feel agitated about it, or point you want to make, just look agitated, or raise your hand, or I don't know, come off mute and interrupt, or whatever. As far as the attendees are concerned, don't forget you can put the questions into the chat bar, put a queue in front so that we know that they're there, and I'll endeavour to get those into the conversation as we go. We've got a reasonable amount of time, because I think I don't think I've ever been on one of these things where we're actually ahead of time, but as I interpret it, we're doing pretty well at the moment, so we should be able to have time for a fairly in-depth conversation. What I want to start off with is, you know, we've seen Fiona's contribution and we've seen Dan's video. It's that kind of question about balancing the scale of the challenges, which we heard from Fiona, enormous, but also where have we got to now, and how big is the challenge that's facing us? Are we making progress? Are we at base camp, or are we halfway up the hill? Where are we right now? And I'm going to ask Katie to start on that one, because you've been around doing this for a particularly long time.
I'd love to say we're halfway up the hill, but I don't think that's the reality, unfortunately. And I do think we are probably at base camp, or maybe lower. But there is, you know, I think that there is some really heartening and interesting stuff going on. And I think innovation in this space is absolutely key. And I think the whole kind of Eat Them to Defeat Them campaign has been groundbreaking, and that's been seen by the advertisers, because that campaign has won lots of awards and things. Which is key. I think the other bit is quite interesting to look at some of the statistics around Cardiff and the Vale, and actually where there's been a food partnership in place for quite a long time now. We've seen stability, not necessarily increases, but stability where other places have decreased on things like the weight of children, healthy weight of children at 4 and 5 years old at reception, and the amount of fruit and veg that adults are eating. So Cardiff is sitting top of those levels. They're also sitting top on the uptake of Healthy Start vouchers that Fiona mentioned earlier. So just thinking about kind of 3 indicators where we've got a sustainable food partnership and this development of a good food movement in Cardiff, I think, you know, you can see that the dial is, I think it is starting to shift in the right direction. But in Cardiff, I'd say it's certainly not going down. And, you know, as you know, we're working on this sustainable food approach in other parts of Wales now. And I think that's a really fundamental platform for a lot of this kind of work.
Katie, you know, in terms of the battle for hearts and minds, as Dan was putting it, really, you know, we have to accept that a lot of the resources are on one side there. How do you feel about that in terms of, you know, the likelihood of it making a real difference? Does it feel to you like there's a reality that we can fight that battle on the airwaves, for instance?
I think it's, you know, the trouble with the food system is it's global, isn't it? I mean, it's, you know, we're massively influenced by the whole global food system, and we we access the majority of our food from supermarkets and not very much from our local food system. It's interesting to have a look at the programme for government and see what Welsh Government's put in there. And one of the things that they have included is a community food strategy. And I think that if we can have some investment, and I don't think it needs tons and tons of investment, but it just needs the right investment with the right people in the right places. I think there is the potential to shift the dial. And I think Wales has got, because of its legislative framework around the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, and some of the commitments that have been made, like the socio-economic duty. So we need to make sure we pay due regard to inequality and everything that we're doing and that kind of thing within local government. The way governments need to be looking at their wellbeing plans now. So what actions are they going to put in to address the challenges that they've got in their local areas going forward now for the next 5 years? I think there is an opportunity for Wales, but at the same time, there's an awful lot of external forces which we don't necessarily have control over, things like trade deals and the kind of global supply chains and COVID and the other stuff.
Yeah, the challenges don't go away, do they? Beth, what's your view on what influences your peers? The people of your age group. What are you finding? What's most effective? Is advertising important in that way?
I would say, hands down, advertising is the biggest effect on what young people eat. For me, I would say especially in the sporting industry, like we've seen recently with Ronaldo moving the Coke out of the way for water, especially people my age are quite sporty and into their football, maybe not as engaged with food poverty and things. That can make or break someone's opinion, especially for advertising sports drinks and things. That's a big one. In terms of junk food, on sort of radio, TV, if there's, I think McDonald's run like a monopoly campaign, those sort of big UK-wide events get people talking, and I think that's where they get young people. And now we've got sort of like, you could call it counter advertising for the Veg Power adverts, and again, that's going to be UK-wide, so hopefully that can counteract it.
Well, what do you think makes the difference? I mean, does the Marcus Rashford thing being as big as it looks amongst your age group? I mean, from the outside, it looks to be, it clearly worried the government. So would you say that had a day-to-day impact? Most people were aware of that. Is that kind of thing really powerful?
Well, speaking from experience, I've heard lots of conversations about it. It's been such a big thing in the media. And well, your original question, just referring back to that, although not a lot of change has happened, for me in the media and the everyday person's opinion since the Marcus Rashford campaign has changed a lot, because people's eyes were opened to food poverty, and especially the work that the Food Foundation have been doing. So that was a really good way to sort of platform the issue. But now that it's in the public view, it's what we can do to solve it.
Thanks, Beth. Edward, you're in the commercial sector. You're there meeting demand. Do you see patterns in how this can be affected or is affected? Do you see those things making a difference to what you find demand for?
Possibly not by a line-by-line basis, but I guess kind of the wider trends are, if I can use the growth in vegan foods as an example of how that can drive consumer behavior. We're selling more corn and kind of meat substitute products now than ever before. We're not selling a massive amount, but it is on the increase. And that's been driven by something, of course. But vegan foods aren't necessarily veg. Of course, there's pulses in there, pastas, all that kind of thing. So something people can be influenced to change their diets. Now, whether that's due to environmental issues, eating less milk, eating less meat and possibly milk. So that's been substituted by non-meat products, of which veg would be one. So in the food service sector, it does follow the retail sector, a little bit slower to evolve, because by and large, people eating out, they don't want, a lot of them don't want to be bombarded by, the seriousness of life, and they just want a sticky toffee pudding or a steak or something and forget everything else that's happening. It's their night. So people do go out with slightly different priorities. But we are seeing as well in schools, the menus are changing. There's slightly less meat and perhaps a bit more of a feature on veg. Quite a powerful tool I see as a parent is parent pay. Parents on here may be familiar with that. It's here in Carmarthenshire, and that's a great vehicle to get messages through, especially on primary schools, because here in Carmarthenshire you can kind of choose your meal for your child, even though it's a limited choice, but there is choice there. We see that kind of filtering through then into what primary schools are buying and secondary schools, even though in the COVID kitchen, the choice is very limited now, and we all understand why, on social distancing and trying to get food through quickly. So it's understandably, there's a bit of a pause on, it's a case now of just getting food into children. So if anything, we're selling some more chips into there, which I know is frowned upon. However, needs must in this kind of instance. But it is, and it's fascinating how anybody within the supply chain and people just sitting outside the supply chain can try and influence, either through that push to say, this is what we've got. And this is where, in our own admission, we haven't been that strong in promoting veg. And this was pointed out by a couple of the veg ambassadors who kind of underlined our thoughts. And that's probably changed the way we're looking at things to, and it was mentioned, a conversation between yourself and Steve Terry on Monday, Simon, on making veg the star, or words to that effect. And I've been thinking quite a bit about that. I'm thinking, yeah, we have been kind of pushing kind of veg products, and it's always the branded stuff. So we're guilty of it as well as a company. So we're having to think about, what about side dishes, cream spinach, tender stem broccoli with parmesan, giving people ideas. And probably that's where we haven't really done that well, by our own admission, but that'll change, and we'll need a bit of help from you guys as well, so we can try and influence our customers and make it easy for them. Sort of prepped veg, this is an easy option for you. You don't have to be peeling carrots, you don't have to employ somebody else in the kitchen, even if they are available, and that's another issue. Just to make it very easy for people in the kitchen to turn to veg. So they're the steps we're going to take in the future.
It's interesting, isn't it? You kind of, that sticky toffee pudding argument relates back to something that Dan said, isn't it? About, that heat of the moment decision. I deserve it, therefore I'm going to have it. Mostly I do that with wine, but it's funny that we don't want to reward ourselves with the most unbelievable carrots, isn't it? Really, in a sense, it's there is no reason why we shouldn't do that. And actually, I suppose in my life, I probably would think more that way. Alex, you again are meeting public demand. How would you assess things at the moment in terms of where we are and what the level of demand is? Are you finding that you've got a ready market available, a growing market?
Yeah, before we founded Swperbox, we did a lot of market research into this sector and the recipe box sector. It is a growing market, and we know that COVID has just exacerbated that, and people expect things or like things delivered to their house free of charge. Amazon has obviously helped push that as well. The demand is there, but I'd say that our, as was highlighted earlier, our customer base is slightly more affluent, and then we use profits to redisperse that for social value. So our customer base not necessarily is the target audience that we want to influence. Yeah, I probably wouldn't be able to say much more on that, really.
But you're sort of preaching to the converted on that side of things, would you say?
Definitely, yeah. And we see that across. We have a menu that has 6 different options. So we've got a 50-50 split between meat and fish and vegetarian and vegan. Always got 2 vegan options, but we're probably seeing about 70% of that still is aimed at the meat and fish option, even though the vegetarian vegan option are nutritionally balanced and are cheaper. So that really highlights that people, people's reliance on sort of still a meat and 2 veg issue. From the veg report that was out this week, we still haven't changed much since the 1970s, which is quite astounding. And I think, personally, I know how to cook a little bit, and I know how to eat healthy, and I know what I should be eating and how I should be eating, but that doesn't necessarily reflect into what I buy and what I eat. And other people that we know aren't in that position. So anything we can do to, like Dan said in the video, is inspire, really. And I think we, as an industry and as speakers, we get quite bogged down in what some might see as the mundane with policy and how we see change happening, but we lack inspiration and we lack people that drive inspiration here in Wales and across the sector.
Fiona, I'm going to ask you the question about how far we are up the mountain and how you feel about it. How optimistic do you feel at the moment? But also specifically, I think on that, the question of inequality, because I think it's one that gets raised time and time again. And in the past, sometimes when we're talking about food policy, the quality of what we consume, its local nature or not, and the effect on the environment, it's very easy to get accused of these are middle class preoccupations. So I'm always conscious that we need to meet this head on. I mean, my view is, why on earth should the poorest in society be eating the worst food? So that's to me is the thing that we have to address. But Fiona, where are you on the how far up the mountain are you on the optimistic mountain?
I'm definitely glass half full in terms of life and where we're at, Simon, because I think if you're not, you don't get anywhere. So I think we've got to be thinking optimistically and positively about the future, even if we've got strong challenges. Interestingly, if you look at Leeds, for example, and you take childhood overweight and obesity, their collective action over about 10 years saw demonstrable results. And I think for me, one of the key messages is there is no one solution. And there was a paper a couple of years ago on doing an evaluation of inequalities per se, not just in the food arena in England. And I think it looked across about 80 different arenas. So that just shows you how complex it is. And I think it was Ed that said, we've got to try and find simple, practical action in a world of complexity. So I think we do have a challenge on our hand. Katie highlighted that for us, probably in Cardiff and Vale, we're keeping things steady, and then the trick will be, how do we get those statistics to actually start changing in a positive direction? And I saw Judith's comment in the chat, if you've got £1.62 a week to spend on food, how on earth can we encourage people to eat healthy food? So for me, it's about, how do you make it easy for people? One is to design it in. So some of the peas pledges and that kind of thing is to design in more veg into the system. So wherever you're buying it, you're eating a healthier portion of veg by default in many ways. Using all different kinds of settings. We've talked about schools. There is always potential to influence and work with our schools and our local authority colleagues in our restaurants. There's no one solution. It is multiple arenas. And if you design those types of things in, you can design them in such a way that those with the least have access, equal, if not greater access to these types of arenas. So I think it's really complex, and underpinning it is poverty itself. Other arenas like housing, we've got to help people in a wider sense on things that are important to them, so that they've got more than £1.62 a week to spend on food, and that's about the social policy arena per se. So many different solutions, and I think in many arenas we can find practical actions to create some of the change. So I'm always positive. We've got all of these people in the room talking about it. There's always, it's a springboard as we come out for COVID to take action. And I think there are areas either internationally or in other areas in the UK that show you can get that change if you commit and you stick to a set of actions for a long period of time.
I think given the statistics that you presented, and you know, it seems to me sort of unbelievable that the way we could approach food inequality is to say, well, we have to have cheap, poor food with very bad outcomes for those individuals because that's all the poorest people can afford. I mean, that just is that's an indictment of the economic situation of those people, isn't it? More than anything else. Beth, I think we need to talk more about school. I mean, I'm always kind of confused at why, given all the discussion that we've had about school meals over the years, and all the discussion we've had about school cooking, all the evidence that we see that the impact those two things can have, not just on the life chances and health prognosis for the individuals, but on their lifetime habits, we still hold back on spending money on school lunches, and we still don't want to introduce food properly into the curriculum so everybody leaves school with those basic skills and the pleasure of being able to execute those skills, something I talked about earlier. Beth, how do you feel about that? I mean, what's your feeling on school lunches and school and cooking on the curriculum?
I mean, so in primary school, from my experience, there was a lot more emphasis on eating healthy. And I remember transitioning from primary school to high school, how much more free choice and options that we had. But then going into that environment, although at the time it seemed very lovely, it wasn't as healthy, and it still isn't. I mean, that might be just because of the size of my school. There's around 2,000 pupils. But for me, the transition from primary to high school, firstly, is a bit of an issue. There seems to be more of an emphasis on primary where there should be on secondary as well. I'm a type 1 diabetic, so I have to make sure that I know the carbohydrate value of everything that I'm eating. And it got to a point that in secondary school, because the options were so similar, it was all quite carby, I ended up bringing my own things in because it's just not accessible. And for someone with food allergies as well, it can be quite difficult to judge. In my school, and talking to other ambassadors, it's in theirs as well. You have to pay for water because during COVID times, the fountains aren't working because of cross-contamination. I can see why it's there, but the water is very expensive in our school. So, I mean, it could be £1 for water. So that's something that the Food Foundation have been trying to fix, but the only way that we can do that is by policy, which is now the time to act. In terms of education in school, I really don't think there is enough emphasis on learning the basics. In our food technology lessons, I was finding that the classrooms were overcrowded with not enough resources, and often we'd have to pay for it ourselves. So if some of the class aren't contributing, it's really, really difficult. And even if we were actively cooking, it would be things that are easy for the teacher and aren't really transferable into real life. So for me, the best way to solve that issue would be talking to young people. What do they want to cook? Talk to young people about the menus they want in school, because I'm sure that you'll find people want to eat healthy. It's just the options that we're given. So for me, it's about getting young people involved into the planning of the menus and into the school food curriculum, which hopefully can be changed.
Gary, can you tell us a little bit about your work at the very young level, and also if you have any thoughts about the new curriculum and the way in which that can be helpful in bringing some of these bring some of this learning into schools, whether that's cooking or knowledge of where the food comes from or nutrition?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I totally agree with what Beth just said. I think there is a real often a focus in preschool around healthy eating. It certainly has been a shift, I think, in the last 10 years around that, with practitioners working in that to really focus on that as a really serious and important topic, whilst at the same time making it fun and engaging for young children. I think the area of development for preschool is they often use, like, fruit is really easy for them to kind of engage with children at that age. You know, we talk 2, 3, 4-year-olds. And I think veg is sometimes left behind. So I think there's some area, it's an area of development for that age, for people working with children at that age. And primary school, I agree. I think that there's been a huge amount of work done, and it's really positive, and they really do focus on that. There's lots of stuff around the sugar content on drinks. You know, pretty much every primary school I've been into in Swansea with the work I've done, you know, looking at their snacks and the different foods that they provide, there's often a display on the wall, and it's there for children to see, and that education is really great. But I would agree that I think that focus is lost as they move into the next stage of their education, and it seems to disappear, and I don't know why that is. For me, you know, to share some of those experiences as well, that you know, the people talked about their inspirational veg moments. You know, again, working with really young children, to see them interact with vegetables and fruits that they don't interact with outside of the setting. It's really fascinating to see their response to it, but also it really highlights the fact that a lot of these families, particularly in deprived areas, they aren't having, you know, these children don't have access to things like, to go off topic, but blueberries, for example. You know, that's something that you often see in early year settings, and you see the children that this isn't something they've seen before, and they're only seeing it in this professional environment. So it's really important for us to get this right with educational settings, with preschool, nurseries, from the youngest age, to really introduce fruit and vegetables at that age, because often it's their only experience. And having done lots of work as well with families and family support, again, we looked at diet, and we've done lots of stuff around, you know, different groups of working with that. There's definitely a lack of knowledge, you know, in some areas and some families around A, what food is, what vegetables, what they even are, and B, what to do with them if they do get access to them. The money factor is a really important issue, and you know, and projects like Alex's, which really support that, you know, they're hugely important. And I would like to see a shift, you know, in some government policy around the way that we operate and support food banks around that. But that's you know, around making sure that we're supporting local providers to provide food banks and the people that access food banks with these foods, as opposed to just kind of sometimes the foods that are there that, you know, perhaps aren't as nutritious as we would like them to be. In terms of the curriculum, I think it's a real positive. I think that, you know, it's a real chance to support that change that's needed in secondary school education. I think it is needed. I've got 2 children myself that you know, are in that age group, in school. And it's been really interesting to see their experience of the cookery classes. The stuff that they're cooking isn't necessarily very healthy. With the stuff they come in, the recipes they've had to take in, they've not been great, you know, in all honesty. So again, I think that shift from primary, when they were really, really supporting healthy choices, I don't think secondaries at the moment are on the same page. The other thing I'd like to raise on that is that I think often a lot of the people that work with secondary children also don't provide good role models for them. I think, again, having been involved in a number of projects with children and young people, people in the care system and things like that, is that the adults then are like, all right, let's bring in the sugar, let's bring in the sugary snacks because they've been with us all day. So let's treat them with a whole bunch of sugar at lunchtime and then expect them to do what we want them to do in the afternoon. And that doesn't happen. Sometimes those professionals, they really need to change the way they practice and the way they work with children. And I think, again, for me, that's a huge area of focus for us, is that we've got to look at ourselves as adults and say, are we behaving in the right way? You know, it's all well and good a nursery worker walking around saying, you know, let's eat lots of fruit and vegetables. If they're walking around with a drink that Ronaldo might not approve of, you know, in their hands, then that's not the right message to send. So I think we need to look at ourselves as well, continually.
Yeah, it's I mean, when, you know, looking back, it's a huge cultural change from when I was a child, when you would see the teachers sat down having the same meal that the kids had. And of course, we were all taking school meals at that point in time. Edward, you're, as a company, heavily involved in school catering, and you and I have been working together on a project in Carmarthenshire, which is aimed at putting more local food on the public plate. And we're both aware, if we weren't aware before, I'm now aware what a challenge that is going to be. But what do you feel about the role that food could play in the curriculum? And you're at the real sharp end of it, because you also know that how limited the budgets are on the local authority side as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. It is kind of cost sector catering, and that means it's catering to a value. And I do empathise with catering teams across Wales and the whole of the UK to try and deliver something for £1.50 or whatever it might be. So insofar as food, it's integral to, I'm going to state a very obvious thing here. We all need food three times a day, ideally, even though there's too many within Wales who are looking to have it 3 times a day. So I can't, I'm always struggling to think we're having the same kind of dialogue as we had probably 10 years ago. Even though the volume's been turned up somewhat, it's been amplified, but nonetheless, and I can't quite understand why we're still having it, but I know it's down to budgets and so on and so forth. But I think another reason could be you could introduce extra portions of veg to the school menu, but are children going to eat it? And we were involved in a project with broccoli, as a matter of fact, with a local authority in Wales. And yes, the portions went onto the plate, thumbs up. However, a lot of that veg went into the bin, which is even worse. It's exaggerating a problem. Not only aren't you getting the veg into the children, you're increasing food waste, which has a high cost and environmental impact. So insofar as, I guess, camouflaging veg into meals, and this is, I'm no caterer, I know a bit. I'm still not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing. You're getting the veg into the children. However, do the children know it, and will they ever know they've eaten courgettes? And so they need to know these kind of things as well. But it is that emphasis on the food, and I dare say the whole food supply chain. And that's a wider debate again, isn't it, in terms of knowledge on where food comes from. And it might be local, of course it might be, but there are some foods which, pasta, for example, and rice, which we can't grow here in Wales, but there is, there is value in educating children where those type of foods come from and why we can't grow them here in Wales or the UK, even on those 2 projects. And I've seen so many really good examples of schools, primary schools mainly, who are growing their own veg, and then they use that. There was a great one in Caerphilly. So they'd invested a little bit in a cafe, so the children would, beg your pardon, oh, there goes the light. So the children would create a dish, and the parents and guardians would come in the evening. So it was great to kind of integrate the menu planning, the growing of the food, numeracy skills, communication skills, organizational skills, and it just seemed to have everything. Again, whether many schools could emulate that, I'm not too sure, but that left a lasting impression with me on how the food and everything could add to other skills. It's not just about the food, it's everything else.
Yeah, Katie, there's a lot of questions coming. There's some good questions coming in about school meal recipe design and about food being at the center of the curriculum. Where do you feel we are with that? And we can see the opportunities. Edward and I have been working on in Carmarthenshire, the idea of putting more local food, more veg on the public plate. And one of the things that's crucial to that is the incorporation of social value into procurement. How far down this road do you think we are? Are we able to make progress on this? Are things changing?
So I think we're in a moment in time that we have to grasp on this agenda at the moment. And I don't want to sit and do lots of boring policy speak, because I'm not sure the panelists want to hear about that. But we are in a particular moment where we have lots of very relevant legislation open for consultation that can influence this agenda. I think the first thing I will say is that, you know, putting food on the curriculum comes second. The first thing is making sure that we're putting a meal on every child's plate. So for me, the first thing is that every child, certainly every child who needs it, should be receiving a free hot meal in school. But actually, if we really want to level the playing field here, everybody in Wales, every child in Wales should be receiving a free meal at lunchtime. And in fact, I'm not going to steal Beth's words. I'm going to hand over to her, because when we had our pre-meet, she put it far more eloquently than I. So I'm going to hand over to Beth and let her say, and you can come back to me afterwards, Simon, if you like.
Yeah, sure. Beth, go ahead. Tell us about that.
Thank you very much. So just piggybacking off of your point, the point that I made in the pre-meeting was that in schools we are all given the same opportunity, no matter where we come from. You know, no one gets extra teacher time because of who their parents are, for example. But when it comes to food, it's seen, well, to me anyway, as if it has to be there, not as a learning opportunity, but everyone, as opposed to being level like we are in the classroom, it's hierarchical. It depends what your parents' income is and whether you get the same food opportunities as someone else. So to me, the only way you can destroy that hierarchy is by making it level for everyone, because it's not the same in the classrooms.
What do you think the reception to that would be? How difficult would it be to institute that? If we could pull a lever tomorrow and say, okay, it's free school meals for everybody coming up, and we're going to make sure that they're really delicious, very wholesome, balanced, etc. How's that going to go down?
I mean, it would be a monumental task, but for me, when the idea of the NHS was first around, people thought that was too big of a job. But I don't see why this couldn't be implemented if there was sufficient funding and everyone was down for it, really. I think, well, ideas seem fantastical until they're implemented, definitely.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because some of us have been looking at the Copenhagen example recently, where, you know, they went from a position of they used organic, but they went position with 5% organic on the public plate to 90% in a period of round about a decade. And they had some of the same issues, all the same issues that we're talking about now, really, and including the resistance from children to the change in the menu, but they've managed to get over that. So it's really interesting to hear that. Alex, you've been working with some schools, I know in particular. What are you finding in terms of the initiatives that are taking place there? Are there, you know, are we in danger sometimes if we do lots and lots of small things and they're very exciting, they then expire, somebody else does another exciting thing in a different school? Or are we in a position where we have got some prime examples of how to do this, and that are setting the pace for others? I'm never really sure which is the best way forward. Should we be dragging government behind us by showing them the way to do it? What do you think, Alex?
I think it has to be both, doesn't it? It has to be action, not words. You know, again, like you say, people have been discussing this issue for over 10 plus years. You know, we've seen some prime examples, and echoing the words from Katie and Beth, is we see primary schools that they're just taking it upon themselves, because they also, due to COVID, are running food banks and community food hubs. They're on the front line dealing with families that are in food poverty. And yeah, you know, one example, they've taken the opportunity now to just off their own back, just start teaching cooking at primary level. Not only that, they're sending home educational recipe boxes for the children to cook with their parents at home. And it just adds another layer of engagement, but they really want to see that carried on into secondary school. And obviously with the hierarchy of primary into secondary, we can use the impact of the people that are pioneering action, but, you know, government has to come to the plate, and we have to bring in policy, and we have to make certain things mandatory. Otherwise, there will always be this disconnect. And like you say, things will happen in silo, and overall action won't really make much of a difference, unfortunately. And if I could just say on the Copenhagen model that we've looked at before, they managed to achieve amazing things over their time period with just a 2% investment. 2% of public food spend as an investment has led to some truly outstanding things.
Yeah, that's true. But it's also interesting, Alex, that, I mean, they started from a base of spending twice as much on school food, I think, as we do on a per head basis, which with Fiona, I mean, you know, this thing that kind of gets me all the time, which is, look, you know, you gave us those figures. They're figures that we kind of knew about anyway. We know how frightening those prospects are. We kind of know what the answers are, but we can't seem to get politicians to see that equation between, you know, upfront investment for, you know, protecting us in the future, and obviously saving us money in the future. I mean, some of the you know, the diet related diseases you talked about are costing us hundreds of millions of pounds a year in Wales at the present time. I find that difficult. Fiona, how do you kind of square that? I mean, it reminds me of a conversation I once had with Leighton Andrews when I talking about putting school food on the curriculum, and he said, yeah, I'm not going to do that at the expense of mathematics and English and whatever. And I feel that, you know, food still isn't it seems like the bleeding obvious, but it's still not taken seriously. Fiona?
That's really interesting. You know, I think you have to go on the opportunities when they exist, and you have to make the connections. They may not always be made. So if we think about school catering, then it's what's the procurement policy? How joined up is it? What are the opportunities there? You know, we talked about at the beginning what's innovative and what's creative, and I think if we keep asking just the same things, we get the same answers. You know, there may be opportunities to join things up, and then you create a business case around it. Because I think the straight ask of, well, we need this and it will cost X million pounds, in the main, it's very difficult to get that. You know, we've got to make connections between certain arenas, I think, to build the case to get the investment, and so that's one thing. But you've got to get people behind you. So if I think for us in Cardiff and Vale, I think we've got people behind us. We've got to make the case and create the opportunity for change. It's not easy though, because if you take certain sectors, so it's a long-term benefit and gain of investing in certain arenas. So, you know, if we had a perfect food world, we're possibly not going to impact on diabetes till 10 years down the line. So impact on healthcare is not going to happen till 10 years down the line. So that investment business articulation might not sell it. So it's about where are the politicians, what are the new politicians interested in? I always think of it as riding waves, riding on the back of waves. What's the wave we can ride on to get the interest and opportunity? What are the connections we can make to join up certain bits of the system to get investment, and maybe disinvestment in something else? And it's a kind of long-term gain. So Simon, you know, there's not an easy answer to get an additional investment. Sometimes you've got to take the opportunities when they arise, and they're not always immediate. And sometimes you've got to come in on it from a completely different angle as well than the one that's staring us in the face. And that's the art of public health, actually, which you know, Katie is very good at. But and just back to the other thing about, is it about changes right across school systems, or is it about small innovative ideas? And I completely agree with Alex. I think it's both. So you need to do small changes right across the population has impact. Small innovative opportunities in different localities can capture people's imagination and enthusiasms. You need a mixture of both. It's a long game.
it's a long game, but politicians have relatively short horizons in sight sometimes, and you know, I remain convinced that still is part of the problem. My solution to that would be to put Beth in charge, basically, as Minister of Food. I think we should do that next week.
I'll take you up on the opportunity if you'd let me.
I see no reason not to do that. Katie, would you like to say, you put some figures there about free school meals, and I think that's really interesting, because in a sense we need to make the business case, don't we? Here we need to be, you know, if we were a business, we'd be saying, okay, we can't afford not to invest now, because if we don't, there's disaster heading towards us, and in the long term this is the right strategy. Katie, why do you think we're not doing that?
Well, it was interesting, the session this morning, a very wise man said, with money will follow clarity. So maybe our message isn't clear enough. And I think that's something that collectively, actually, we are working on. And I just think, you know, there's an absolutely huge opportunity here, but exactly as Fiona says, we need to be linking up all the different elements of the system, and we need to be linking how we're producing our food with our, you know, with the standards in which we want to produce it, both for health and the climate and nature. And we need to be linking that to the, you know, the floor of the market, a secure market we can be creating for our local producers, to give them a baseline on which to expand and develop and create short supply chains. And we need to be linking that back into the schools then by providing a fantastically predominantly Welsh grown meal for every child in Wales. And then we need to be doing that back another step as well, and linking it into the curriculum and how children are learning through food about all of the different life skills that they'll need, whether that's, you know, budgeting or cooking or selling. And I think, you know, some of that, I think Edward's actually got a really nice example of a school that have kind of done that process of using food through the whole system within the curriculum. So for me, it's about that. And as I say, I think, you know, we have got this moment of time because we have got some key commitments from Welsh Government in their programme for government that give us the right levers for building this case. But I think that idea of us building that very clear case is really important.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, how can anyone not be excited by that vision that you've just outlined? I mean, to me, it's kind of, you know, in a sense, we've had the answers for a long time, but I think you're right. We're at kind of crossroads at the moment, and we're at least looking in the right direction, but there is that possibility that we'll still miss the turning. We all need to work really, really hard from this point onwards, don't we? And I think one of the things about COVID with, you know, not being able to meet in person, but more of this happening, is that we probably are more coordinated and joined up than we've ever been in Wales. So, you know, let's hope we can build on that. We are kind of using up our time here. So I am going to come to a final question for everybody, which is, I want to imagine, you know, the wonderful position in which you are the First Minister. The programme for government came out this week, but a couple of things that you would like to see happen, or you would implement indeed, if you were First Minister. I'm going to start with Edward. And Edward, you know, I want to pay tribute to how much effort you put in trying to change things. And I know you're always coming up with brilliant ideas and frustrated by the fact that they don't go ahead as quickly as possible. And I just want to pay tribute to you for that, because it's the kind of energy that we really need. So Edward, you're First Minister now. What would you do?
Well, thank you. Well, firstly, you know, it's great to be another First Minister born and bred in Carmarthen. So that's a nice little, nice little point there. If I was First Minister, I'd look back and I'd see the Labour Party. We've been in government in Wales since year dot, or since it became devolved. We'll probably got a good chance of winning the next election. So let's be bold here. It's different here in Wales, and I think politicians in Wales can be confident because, you know, if past history is anything to go by, they're going to be voted in the next time as well. Most of them anyway, and with a majority in this case. So I would be looking at the education system. I'd get procurement people together. I wouldn't literally bang their heads together, but I'd bring procurement, catering, education, and say, come on, what are you going to do about this? We've got a massive cost of COVID. We've seen the negative effect of health in our communities, and how one pandemic, albeit a big one, has affected the affected the most deprived areas. So, and food is critical to that. We heard we heard the evidence earlier on, didn't we? So it would be to try and change the culture and change the mindset, and just make it happen, and get Sophie Howe on board, the Wellbeing Commissioner. They've got great ideas on procurement. Again, possibly slightly frustrated as well that things aren't going as quickly as they want, because it is one of the 7 pillars of the Wellbeing Act, a healthier Wales. So it's been, it's law, it's an act here in Wales. So again, just do it and get on with it. That's probably what I would say to them. Thank you.
Alex, there was a question that came in about land and encouraging horticulture and growing, and you're quite close to that world. What would you like to see the government doing in that respect? Because we're talking here about local food, but as you and I know, some of the work that we've been doing in Carmarthenshire with Edward, that supply isn't there at the moment. So is there something you'd like to see happening in respect of mixed farming, horticulture, etc.?
Yes, I think if we're talking about policy, free school meals is a great starting point for that. And if looking at some of the statistics that Katie put in there and the cost of it, it's actually infuriating that hasn't happened, and money being spent elsewhere. So to use that as a driver for stimulating demand, if we then match that with changes in procurement, like we all want to see, then those contracts will underpin regenerative farming, healthier food on the plate, and obviously have the desired impact on health as well. And then if I was First Minister, my 2 other policies would be cooking and food education on the curriculum. I'd increase the budget for free school meals. And also I would ask local authorities to set targets and develop action plans for a transition to a local Welsh food supply, with true cost accounting, incorporating provenance, scoring on carbon footprint, environmental regeneration and social action. And just, like Edward said, just do it, just get on with it.
Something you've been working on in Carmarthenshire in that respect over the past year or so as well, isn't it? Fiona, you're in charge now.
So I've got 3 things. One, I would do everything in my power in social policy to tackle poverty, because food poverty is underpinned by wider poverty. So I'd do that. The second thing, and there's many people in the room that would know much more than me about what would be invested in, but for me, that whole growing and cooking in local communities, I would do everything I could within policy and pump prime investment to enable that right across our communities. And the third thing is I would take action legally around junk food advertising.
Brilliant. Katie. Katie?
Right, yeah, I'm here. So I think the first thing I would do is, I think one of the things that we're suffering from in Wales is that we have all of our policy in the food area in lots of different boxes. It's such a cross-cutting area of work, and it touches on so many different aspects of life. But what we don't have in Wales is a vision of what we want our whole food system to look like in Wales. So what is it that we want our food system to do for us, to do for our country, our nature, climate? What is it? Because we don't know. Nobody's actually telling us. And we haven't got that shared vision across the country. And I think that needs to happen. So one of the things that we've been doing through the Food Policy Alliance Cymru is having a look at what that vision could look like. And we think the best way to do that is to set up a food system commission. which would involve all of the different stakeholders in the food system, including civil society, to actually build that collective vision of what we want our food system to look like. And once you've built that, then everything else should fall down out of that. And I guess the number one thing for me probably that would sit under that would be to do universal free school meal provision linked to our local supply chain, and build the infrastructure and investment that's needed to enable that to happen.
Yeah, fantastic stuff. I mean, the need for an overarching food policy, it's kind of like when the program for government comes out, it mentions food in a few places, but it's almost because it's such a big topic that it kind of, nobody takes responsibility for it and it gets ignored. And yet when we look at it, just think what a transformational project that could be for the country, not just in terms of the effect, but also in terms of getting civil society involved, like you say. So a great democratic project that involves, you know, the whole of Wales, because it does touch on everybody's lives. I just think, you know, that's such an important idea. Beth, I've already done my thing as First Minister. I've appointed you as Food Minister. So what are you going to do?
Well, if I was First Minister, I'm going to take like your job. I'd do a lot of things. But in relation to food, the first thing I'd probably do is expand the FSM scheme and eventually to implement it for everyone. I would, well, something as a young food ambassador, what I've noticed is that in different parts of even Wales and the whole of the UK, food accessibility is different to everyone depending on where they are and local rulings. So in Wales, I'd try to make it cohesive and then pass that on to the rest of the UK. But probably most importantly, I would subsidise locally sourced food for schools and the companies that provided them. I just think it's so important. And well, from my experience in school, most of the food is quite processed, it's not as healthy. But if you're supporting local businesses, local farmers, and it's going to be better food for the kids, I just think that's the best thing you could possibly do.
Yeah, and a lot of that money goes back into the local economy as well, where we have, you know, particularly in rural Wales, well, all across Wales, we have real problems with decline of the rural economy and the community cohesion and all the effects that has. Gary, finally, what are you doing as FM?
Yeah, I think one of the things I'd do is I'd put more pressure on schools to look at some of these really fantastic schemes that go on, like edible playgrounds, for example, which are non-mandatory at the moment, and it depends very much on the personalities of the school leadership to get involved in these things, and the healthy school scheme, for example, and things like that. So I'd put more pressure on schools to sign up to these really fantastic initiatives. Edible playgrounds is just an amazing idea, you know, and again, it would really encourage a learning environment, but also kind of a fun environment for children and that sort of thing. And again, it's showing great success. But my problem with those is that they're not mandatory, so that, you know, that it depends very much on the personality of the school and the leadership drive within those schools. So that's something I would really support. I agree with everything pretty much that all the other panelists have said around, you know, free school meal expansion. I think that's really important. But also I'd look to kind of, you know, in terms of tackling poverty, I think the veg box that you know, perhaps is definitely associated with middle class families that, you know, again, has shown an increase during COVID of people using local veg supplies, which is amazing. It's great news. But actually, I think local governments need to target some of their kind of COVID response around supporting delivery of those veg boxes to areas and families that need them. And that's not something that I'm aware of is happening very much at the moment. I think it definitely needs to happen more. You know, projects like what Alex is running in Cardiff, and it sounds like Cardiff is definitely further down the road than perhaps other local authorities are in terms of that support. So that's another area I'd like to see a shift in the way that we fund, you know, our food support for families in need.
Great, thank you, Gary. Yeah, I think that's really important stuff. And yeah, there is good stuff going on in Carmarthenshire, but as we know, there's also good stuff going on across most of Wales. And I think, you know, in a sense, to sum up, that's one of the most exciting things about a meeting like this is that, you know, that there is great intellectual capital there. There's a huge amount of energy. I think all feel that we're a real crossroads at the moment because of the circumstances that we find us in post-Brexit, post-COVID. We've probably never had the opportunity to make the change that we have now, and I think we need to be energetic, strident, and we need to be asking the right questions of the politicians and holding their feet to the fire. I want to thank all of the panelists for taking part today, to Food Sense Wales, Please for holding this, all you guys for being here, and especially the attendees. It's been a really lively debate. I've really enjoyed doing it, and hopefully we can go away and continue the conversation outside of this. Thank you very much.
Diolch, Simon. Thank you. See you all soon.
See you soon.
Thank you very much, everyone.